All right. Over the last few weeks, the world of boxing has been shaken and then unshaken just to get shaken again. And then I think unshaken for the third time. Eddie Hearn made some major headlines when he announced that a fight between Jake Paul and Canelo Alvarez, of all people, had been pretty much signed and done.
Now it looks like the Jake Paul fight is done, by all accounts.
Which at first glance was one of the craziest things we had seen. I mean, it looked like all these years of being a massive troll or asshole drumming up headlines left and right actually paid off, and Jake seemingly got it done. He pulled off the biggest fight in boxing that's possible for him to make, and that was until he got Canelo's official statement on the matter.
Hey guys, don't pay attention in anything in this fucking YouTuber. I just fight real fighters. Don't fucking around with Canelo.
I think this has been a really interesting time in the world of boxing because the influencer side has been slowly but surely kind of getting accepted into the mainstream. I mean, while we do have Jake doing his Jake thing, we also have Misfits Boxing, which is pretty big over in the United Kingdom and has events all over the world now. And this was one of the first times where we saw the world of traditional boxing really stand up to that and say, enough is enough. And now, of course, in traditional Jake fashion, the guy has a lot of shit to talk in the wake of this. You already know he's going straight for the Canelo scared to fight me angle.
Canelo, I'm coming, my puta.
And this kind of gets to the exact point that has always bothered me about the whole Jake Paul as a boxer thing. Look, if anyone out there wants to devote their life to one of the hardest sports that the world has to offer, I'm all for it, and I think you deserve all the respect in the world. But when it becomes a constant game of manipulating public opinion, I think it kind of just throws a little bit of dirt on what is pretty amazing sport that's kind of fallen out of favor with the public over the past few years. And I've already seen a lot of people in comment sections who don't know anything about the world of boxing and weren't interested in it until guys like this entered the scene, don't really understand what's really going on here. So if you take a look at Canelo's record, Canelo's been fighting over the past few years, twice a year, on Cinco de Mayo weekend, and then the weekend of Mexican Independence Day. And the thing about Canelo is that he'll fight anyone. It doesn't really matter, assuming you pay him what he's worth and you're willing to fight on one of those two dates. Jake and his team with Netflix clearly tried to ambush Canelo with a monster deal, seeing as though Canelo didn't have an opponent currently for that date. They tried to lock it in as quick as possible, but Turki Al-Sheikh came back to Canelo with a more legitimate offer. There's no way to know about the numbers, specifically who's getting paid what, but one thing that's obvious is that Canelo will now be fighting actual professional boxers with his now, I think, 4 or 5 fight deal, with his now 4 fight deal with Riyadh Season. I think for the first time, we're seeing the whole gimmick when it comes to Jake start to work pretty significantly against him, because Canelo is a guy who has long been very interested in respect in the world of boxing. He's not exactly a Conor McGregor that'll play the game and he'll talk some shit right back at you. Canelo's a guy who's clearly looking to build on his resume and his legacy. So all of these antics and the constant name calling, that's only going to work against Jake when it comes to these kinds of negotiations. And now missing out on the biggest fight that exists in the sport of boxing for him, and Canelo's deal goes all the way through this year and next year. We're kind of left in a funny, kind of ironic situation where Jake has clearly been going for the biggest fights possible. He kind of just fucked himself out of the biggest fight. Fan interest is probably not going to be there anymore when it comes to fighting older MMA fighters. All the bigger names in boxing, whether it's Ryan Garcia, Canelo Alvarez, even some of the big names that we're calling him out, like Artur Beterbiev or Daniel Dubois, they're all booked right now. They're all under contractual agreements, mostly with Riyadh Season, so they can't even fight Jake if he wanted to. And again, it's kind of hard to go back to the well of retired MMA fighters. The GFL, funny enough, just came through and signed a bunch of retired MMA fighters. And then, of course, we have a lot of the MMA legends that are still under contract with the UFC, like a Conor McGregor, a Dustin Poirier, etc. I think Jake has actually finally ran the gimmick so hard that there is no one else for him to fight other than a competitive fight against someone his size and more or less his age. I mean, realistically, there's no one else he can fight. I actually thought there was a good chance that they make the Darren Till fight, a guy who just came off of a win against Anthony Taylor. So he has, now stepped into the boxing ring before. He's not a super old guy. He's putting his MMA career on pause, but he's still in his prime. High-level striker, but comes from an MMA background. That's the last fight that would have made sense, and now he's booked. And now we're in a pretty insane situation. If he waits too long and, wants to wait it out to see if one of these guys gets free of their contractual obligations and is ready to fight him, he's probably going to have to wait close to or potentially upwards of a year. And that much inactivity for someone who's not very experienced, is not a good thing. And he's made his image so reliant on the numbers. If he decides to fight someone who it's a clear and total mismatch and it's someone that no one has ever heard of, where he's just going to walk in and get an easy knockout, kind of like the fights he had on DAZN, I don't think anyone's going to be interested in that. I think he's done a good job up to this point, making sure that all of his fights were safe fights, or at least safe enough where he wasn't going to be in too much danger, but also big money fights. And I think he's run the well dry, and now he kind of has to pick one. Now, I do think it's very likely that Jake's next opponent will be Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. The reason I say that is because it looks like Jake is targeting a fight on or around Cinco de Mayo. Chavez has been calling for this fight for a while. Chavez is a former champion, but Chavez is also beyond washed at this point. Chavez, a few years back, actually lost to Anderson Silva in a boxing match a year or two before Jake beat him, which is now also a couple years old. Chavez, who is a relative unknown when it comes to casual boxing fans, the kinds of people that I'm sure he's ideally trying to market towards, that fight is for sure gonna flop. I mean, on one hand, maybe they can super heavily lean into the whole idea that Chavez is a former champion, and maybe that generates some interest, but I don't think it does. I think the best move for him to make right now is to fight someone in his weight class, close to his size and close to his age. A few years ago, Eddie Hearn brought out the name of Chev Clark, who I believe is actually coming off of a loss not too long ago. The guy was starting to get in contention for, at least fighting for, the cruiserweight belt. Jake, who's constantly talking about himself becoming a world champion, that's a fight that might make some sense. The only other name that comes to mind that has the name value, the recognition, and checks those boxes is Vidal Riley. And I think if Jake goes against either of these guys, he gets knocked out. I think we finally reached the point where there is nowhere else to go. I mean, the guy was kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to Mike Tyson. I mean, the guy was almost 60 years old. I do think there's a small chance he tries to go for like a Nico Ali Walsh, the Ali last name. Jake trying to build his career as the legend killer. I think that that's potentially in play. And while there is a massive size difference there, I don't know that that fight is the walk in the park that Jake would potentially think it is. So I think, for better or for worse, the negotiations with Canelo falling through might have just spelled the end of the Jake Paul experiment. Let me know in the comments below, who do you guys think you should fight next? And yeah, thanks for watching.